Laying out a common rafter using the speed square. First, you want to crown your rafter and make sure that you've laid it in front of you with the crown away from you. It's easiest to lay out using a speed square from the top side of the rafter. And typically you want to start at the ridge board and work your way to the tail of the rafter. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to start at the end of your material. Obviously this gets us the most use or the less waste of material if you start right at the end of your material. So we can start at the top. So what you want to do is you want to pivot to the desired slope. In this case, it is the 8. It is an 8/12 slope. And note the side of the speed square that you're using. That is the common angles. The other side is the hip valley. Don't get them mixed up. It always happens, but that's the most common error. Is make sure that you've got you're using the common rafter length or the common angle. All right, so what you want to do is mark that angle, and that represents the center of the ridge board. So I'm trying to draw a common rafter here. Here's our ridge board. There we go. So that particular mark that you are marking there is the center of that ridge board. And imagine all those lines straight. All right, so this is where we're measuring from. It's a layout line. It is not a cut line. So what you want to do is move the speed square over, and that center line that I had on that ridge board, what you're doing is moving from the center point to this edge here of the rafter. Okay, so that measurement needs to be horizontal. Okay, never measure this way. Big no. Right? Always measure square or perpendicular to that line, and that becomes your cut line. Okay? That first layout line is where we measure our length from, because we always calculate a theoretical line length, so that theoretical length comes from the center. So once you've done the math and you come up with the length of your rafter, you're going to measure from that center of the ridge board or the end of the material, which makes it easier. When you do start right at the end of your material, you can just hook your tape on the end of the lumber and pull out your measurement of the rafter. Okay, so this becomes the plumb line at the bird's mouth. Okay, so here is where that 76 inches was measured. Okay, so you're measuring along that top edge, the 76 inches, or the calculated length of your rafter, and you give yourself a plumb line. Once you have that plumb line, you can mark it, and that is the plumb line at the bird's mouth. Okay, when you do this, there's many ways to do it, but I'll show you one way now and two more in a minute. Note the degrees of angle that you have on the speed square. So in this case, it is 32 degrees. Right? We're measuring from here to here, 32 degrees of pivot. So what you're going to do is flip the speed square over, and you're going to count 32 degrees backwards this way. So there's 10, 20, 32. Okay, you're going to count 32 degrees backwards, and that's as simply as taking, sorry, I better finish that when I say that. That's a 58 degree angle, right? 58 degrees. Okay, basically what you're doing is the math. In other words, 90 degrees subtract 32 equals, guess what, 58. 58 degrees. Okay, so you can do the math or you just count on the speed square. Same thing, different way to get there. All right, so now you're going to, like I said, count back the 32 degrees here, or do the math, or simply turn it to 50, what was it, 58 degrees or something, right? So you turn it to the 58 degrees there, and then once you've got it at that angle, you can slide your speed square any which way you want on the edge of the material to get your desired length for your bird's mouth. Okay. So if it was 2.5 inches, obviously that's where we would mark it. If you wanted it to be 2 inches, we would just slide the speed square to the right till the 2-inch mark lines up with the plumb line, and then you would have a 2-inch bearing. Now we would have to calculate the length of our overhang. I'm going to use 12 inches as a projection on this particular one, so you would do the calculations for a 12-inch projection to figure out what your overhang length is. You measure that from your plumb line on your bird mouth, and for an 812 roof, that's 14.42 inches or 14 7/16. So you can see that measurement right there. And note, we're measuring on the top side of the rafter again. Okay. Now you can mark a plumb line at that 14.42 inches, and that represents the outside face of fascia. Then we have to shorten our fascia by typically 1.5 inches. So remember, when fascia board goes on, it's typically 1.5 inches. So that plumb line that we have laid out is this outside face. Then we got to come to this side face, and once again, we need to measure the thickness of 1.5 inch lumber this direction, not this direction. Okay, you want to measure it horizontally or square to the plumb line. So you measure that 1.5 inches, and then that becomes the cut line on the inside face. Okay. So just to review, you have the plumb line, your bird's mouth, and your seat cut. Note that our rafter, from our layout lines, I've drawn a line, and actually a straight line for a change, and that is center of the ridge to the outside of fascia. Rafters always get shorter. There is not one rafter in any roof that gets longer than your calculated lengths. So if you remember to move inward from the outside extremities, you will always be on the right track. So remember that we are measuring on the top edge for our theoretical length right from the end of your lumber. Measure your tail, outside of fascia from the plumb's mouth, and everything gets shorter. Now, other ways to get the seat angle of a speed square. So the other way is to, as you can see, I'm marking right there on, this is showing a 5/12, not an 8/12 anymore. But you pick your slope and you mark it on your lumber right where my pencil line is, and you hold it on the pivot point. Don't slide it left or right. Okay, and you simply pivot to that angle, and that is that angle right there is the seat angle. So basically that is the same angle right there. So you pivot to that mark, and that gives you the seat angle. So that is another way to do it other than doing the math for the angle subtracted from 90. So that is one way. And another way is you can see two lines on your speed square right there as well. There they are right there. Okay, so those two score marks on your speed square is also another way to get a 90 degree. So you simply eyeball it with your plumb line right here. Eyeball those two marks with that plumb line. That will give you the seat angle right here. Now, the only problem with that is it's hard to get an exact measurement of a desired bearing. So you kind of got to guess at it. And that's hard to do because you're sliding the speed square up and down this way to get more or less bearing. 3 ways to get this seat angle.